So guys, in today's video, I want to go over 5 mistakes that every player is making in the solo cash cup. These are mistakes that I've seen throughout the previous weeks, and especially with this new cash cup format, I think that these are mistakes that a bunch of you guys will be making, so I want you guys to watch this video in order to not make them. Be sure to stick around to the end of the video so you guys don't miss any important information. Let's get right into it. So guys, to start off, the first mistake is going to be not having a consistent off-spawn plan. One thing that's a general rule for all solo cash cup players: you must have the same drop spot that you land at every single game. Now there is one exception to this rule, which is when you need a lot of points from a W key game, you can land at a hop drop location in order to maximize the amount of eliminations you get. However, having one drop spot in general is going to be way more beneficial than switching up your drop spot every game because it eliminates bad RNG. Landing at one drop spot can allow you guys to have a consistent amount of loot, have a good idea of where you're going to be rotating, and have a generally good idea of where to land in learning that POI inside and out. Of course, that means you need to make sure you learn every single thing about your drop spot, every spawn, every player that will rotate through, every potential storm surge position afterwards. These are all things you have to consider, and you can do that by looking on websites like Fortnite.gg or finding the best drop for it on websites like landingtutorial.com. These are both great tools. I would definitely recommend you guys use them in order to learn everything about your drop spot. Continually, I'd recommend you also have a backup route in order to get extra loot if you are scuffed off spawn after fighting. There is a likely chance that wherever you land, especially in solos, you're gonna have to deal with some variety of off-spawn pressure, so you guys should land at this drop spot, practice fighting at it. However, for whatever reason, if you have a bad drop or there's going to be too many players going there, you should have a backup loot drop spot that you guys can land at that is going to be foolproof for you guys having loot every single game just in case your main drop spot is compromised. The overall rule of thumb for this is going to be practice, practice, practice. You guys need to constantly be playing solo ranked, solo scrims, practice landing at your drop spot that you guys are going to be landing at in cash cups, and you will eventually perfect it. This is by far the most important tip for the early game in general, so I definitely recommend you guys pay attention to this one. Now, mistake number 2 is going to be constantly switching up your game plans, which is going to be stuff like passive versus aggressive playstyles. Some games you will need to play passive in order to rack up the placement points and live through stacked lobbies. If you guys are at a normal point level for the tournament, this means that you should play passive and you guys should consistently try to get those placement points in order to stay stable and make sure you guys are able to qualify and earn money eventually in this cash cup. Basically, what you're going to have to do is be able to read the lobby and decide on your playstyle based off that. Of course, there's a couple of other factors such as how many points you have and overall how confident you are in your W keying ability. So what I'd recommend is that in games with 50 people or more at Zone 3, try to play passive, or if you don't want to do that, just get a feel from how many points you have, which essentially means that the more points you have, the better the players probably are, and vice versa. If you have low points, the players will probably be worse. In other games, you can pick. I would recommend passive if you guys are trying to play in this season and the format based upon the loot and all of those metas. However, if you are a good player and fighter, you can choose the W key if you want to do that. However, guys, since players in competitive are getting really good at fighting nowadays, the skill level is absolutely high. So I would definitely recommend you guys playing passive rather than W keying in general. Now, mistake number 3, guys, is going to be not fighting correctly within this chapter. There's going to be 3 kind of mistakes I see within this overarching mistake. The first one is going to be not applying constant pressure. You should apply constant pressure during fights to ensure that your opponent doesn't heal. This can help you with finishing the fight quicker, eliminating third parties, and also ensuring that you guys are just able to move about your game more and get more eliminations if you need that. You should try and spray after getting an initial tag onto the enemy player, and then make sure that you don't get pre-fired by avoiding double pickaxing, which means double pickaxing a wall and accidentally getting edited on and shot, and then also focus on using good angles and right-hand peeks such as the peanut butter edit, window peeks that are smart. Basically, having good movement here is going to be crucial to make sure that you guys don't get eliminated by a silly mistake. The second sort of sub-mistake is going to be choosing the wrong fights at the wrong time. If you guys are W keying, try to look for fights in places that are covered by mountains, buildings, or other natural cover. This will ensure that you don't get third-partied. You should only choose fights if you absolutely need surge or if you need a refresh. Also, I'd recommend you don't W key away from the zone ever. Try to get close to or into the storm circle and then focus on fighting. Ideally, I'd recommend you guys look for a lot of eliminations during the late stages of the early game and then the early stages of the end game. And guys, the final sort of stub mistake for not fighting correctly is going to be not utilizing these new items and mechanics correctly. You guys should definitely be utilizing items like the Typhoon Blade, the Void Oni Mask, and other items for mobility. This will help you engage and disengage from fights, which is something that's crucial and a lot of players tend to overlook. And then also, guys, the sprites are crucial, so such as the water sprites for healing, air sprites for rotation, earth sprites for maybe getting better weapons. These are all things you need to consider. In my opinion, this season's meta is vastly different than any competitive meta we've ever seen before, so I definitely recommend you guys continue learning it. Overall for fights, guys, the 3 mistakes are going to be not applying constant pressure, choosing the wrong fights at the wrong time, and then not utilizing the new items and mechanics correctly. Definitely consider focusing on those tips. Now guys, mistake 4 is going to be rotating on the dead side of zone incorrectly. This primarily applies to the mid and the late game. You should always try and rotate dead side because it's how you can position on the side of zone with less people and therefore survive for longer. On average, the side of zone with less people is closer to the edge of the map. This is because less people are rotating in from that side. For example, if you guys are on the map, the side of zone which is closer to the edge of the map will have less people coming in from all the POIs that are far away from zone. Therefore, that's going to be the dead side of zone. Now obviously the dead side of zone can change as the game goes on. That depends on a lot of different factors. However, this is going to be primarily for the late mid game and the early stages of the end game. Another mistake is that people tend to rotate to the deader side of zone, but then the ultimate dead side, which is a big mistake that a lot of players make. Look at things like elevation, terrain, and cover to determine what is the actual dead side. For example, lower areas on the map tend to be more congested and dangerous because they require no resources to get to. Any player can just slide down there and they can be easily suffocated by zone there. What this means is that let's say that you're on a lower part of a mountain and zone pulls up the mountain. You can easily be suffocated by a bunch of builds and players rotating if you don't have the resources to get up the mountain. So while yes, that might be the dead side of zone in terms of how many players are down there, it's not the smart place to be. You guys should go for the dead side of zone that is safest in that respective zone. Something that's on a good layer of elevation, but there's less players on. In order to find this side of zone, you should look at places behind mountains or buildings that can also be part of the dead side because players may have trouble getting behind there. As a result, if you guys are able to get there, you will be safe from a large portion of the enemies in the zone. Basically, try and feel out where the dead side of zone is by scouting and then try to rotate there. Ultimately, dead side of zone is a crucial aspect of playing in the mid game and the late game of competitive Fortnite solos. So please try to master this. This tip will extend far beyond the aspects of this video. And guys, the fifth and final mistake is going to be not rotating correctly during these endgame zones. Now this is something that's kind of a new gen sort of competitive theory. My recommendation is to rotate late in most of the endgame zones. Now the reasoning for this is going to be kind of different than a lot of other people's reasoning for me. Basically, this allows other players to rotate first and deal with the lobby focusing on players waiting to rotate or players that have already pulled the zone. So basically, players that rotate early are going to be focused by other players who haven't rotated yet on the outside of zone, and they're going to also be focused by players who are already in the zone because they pulled it. It's going to be an ugly sort of sandwich lobby focusing, and it's really not what I'd recommend you guys get yourself into. Generally, once the zone starts moving, people get frantic and focus more on their own positioning rather than other players rotating in. So because of this, I'd recommend you try to rotate later in these endgame zones, wait a little bit and try to get some tags on players who are rotating early, and ultimately you guys will have a lot safer rotations using a lot less resources. A second aspect to this is going to be taking height at the wrong time. My recommendation is that you guys should be taking height in solos around zones 10 or 11 because you want to be on height for the final zones in order to get the heal off potential or just finish off the game based on your own terms. Obviously, high ground is a great power position during the end game, but there's going to be a lot of fighting on top of the high ground during the early zones of the end game. Taking high ground in zones 10 or 11 will allow you to have an advantage as the game is closed out. At the end, players on height tend to be running low on materials and resources, so they might drop down to refresh, which is the opportunity that you can use to sneak up during zones 10 and 11 and take height from them. By that point, you guys will hopefully have gotten a couple of refreshes and you should be re-kitted on all of your resources, and on high ground, you guys can ultimately hold it and then try to win out the game. Obviously, high ground is going to be sort of a win condition for a lot of solo games, and that ultimately will lead to you guys doing a lot better in these solo cash cups. But guys, those are the 5 mistakes that I see a lot of players making in solo cash cups. Let me know if you want a video like this for trio cash cups. I'm very interested in making it. But that is about it for this video, guys. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye, guys.